one of the really promising aspects of the plan is the emphasis on coordination, both among city agencies, but also in working with communities. And I'm wondering, how are you working with Department of City Planning now to sort of identify sites and come up with plans for community engagement, meaningful community engagement?
So I think one of the most exciting parts of the way in which the plan was framed, as I mentioned, is really having all of the different agencies at the table and feeling like the plan was theirs, not just HPD's, not just HDC's, but really a collaboration among all of the different agencies. We're very committed. We formed, I took brownies, we did all the things that one has to do to get people to be your friends. And so we developed some very strong relationships and very strong, I think, respect and trust for one another in the process of coming together over the plan. And that certainly has continued. Carl Weisbrod from City Planning, Kyle Kimball from EDC, Gary Rodney, of course, from HDC, Shola Lataye from NYCHA, and I meet very regularly to talk about the different neighborhoods that we're thinking about, to really work together to figure out what each of the agencies can contribute to a more holistic approach to what we think might be appropriate for that neighborhood, but also to think about who are our partners in that neighborhood, who can work best with the various partners in a variety of ways. We're talking a lot among those 5 agencies about the ways in which we can work directly with the neighborhoods, and one of the things certainly that we realize is that it will differ from neighborhood to neighborhood because neighborhoods are different. Some neighborhoods have strong community quarterbacks or whatever you want to call them, but strong institutions now in the community that can really be partnerships and engagement that can bring everybody involved to the table. Other neighborhoods, some of that needs to be developed and nurtured and that kind of thing. And of course, in all of the neighborhoods, we have strong partnerships among the city council members and among the other elected officials. So we'll be working in every different neighborhood to try to figure out, well, what's the best approach in that neighborhood to talking with the community, finding out more about what their needs are, what their aspirations are, what their fears are, and really working to try to bring the jobs that they need, the schools that they need, the infrastructure that they need, along with the housing that they need. So that will vary from community to community, and it's very much a work in progress, but that team, as well as all of our teams, are working together to try to draft really programs that are tailored towards the individual neighborhoods. I do want to say that I certainly completely agree with the council member that there's going to be a lot of education that's necessary. Some of the strongest proponents of affordable housing believe that you have to put the very lowest income housing in the very lowest income neighborhoods, and that may not always be the right long-term approach. It may not be the approach that leads to the most diverse and viable and strong neighborhoods. And so we're going to be working with every neighborhood to talk about the ways in which we can help that neighborhood through our investments become stronger and become more diverse. We also will be working to talk about density in a different way. Density doesn't necessarily mean 40-story towers. It can mean 6 stories instead of 4 stories. It can mean more transit-oriented development right around the A train or right around whatever train. So we'll be working with each individual neighborhood to talk about what those concepts, what those abstract concepts, which are sometimes very scary, mean in reality.
So the plan also focuses, as it should, obviously quite a bit on preservation. And I think, and there's a lot that's new there. And I think one of the things that's very refreshing is the broad perspective that it takes on preservation. And so it's not merely focused on preserving the existing subsidized stock, but also the existing kind of rent-regulated stock and the existing kind of naturally occurring affordable stock where many of our low-income families and households in New York City live. So I want to start with Eric, is that I think one of the really interesting elements of the plan is the idea of entering into a greater number of regulatory agreements with currently unsubsidized owners to lock them in, to draw them in, to promise to keep their units affordable in exchange for tax incentives, tax breaks. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and whether you think that sort of how can the city really compete with the promise of rising rents in many of our neighborhoods?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm going to be pretty confident about it, and I'm going to answer yes, and I'm going to explain why. I also would like to say I always love the way Ingrid asks a question, because when you read the question, you realize that she's closed all the easy exits, and so it's always, can we afford to do it? Can we do enough of it? And can we compete against rising rents? And
that was Vicki's training.
Okay. So the reason I'm going to answer yes, and in a confident yes, is because we've done it, and we are in negotiations to do it with a number of portfolios and investors who have come to us. And the more time that we spend with it, and I have to say, and I think you kind of alluded to this, some of the preservation work and some of the best preservation work that we are doing and have done since the kind of financial crisis of 2008, really, a lot of tools were born out of that period, and it required at HPD a lot of collaboration, not only on the finance and development side, but also importantly, and most importantly maybe, with our code side and also with our asset management team. We've benefited a lot from very low interest rates and very low returns on all sorts of capital in terms of alternative investments, including equity. And we have a number of investors who've come to us on portfolios where they would like to put something under a regulatory agreement in exchange for a tax exemption a lot of times, where folks will say, look, we'll arrange the long-term debt, we'll bring in private equity, that we will do our CapEx, we'll make improvements to these properties. What we really need to do is trade a reg agreement for a tax exemption, and we can even we'll be flexible on some of those terms, depending on which direction the world goes. And we've had a lot of success in doing that, and we've kind of, through that, we can also look at points at which both sides of the arrangement reach their kind of indifference point, and therefore you get to a strike price. And again, I think it's important to be able to talk in detail and kind of demonstrate to the world that we're pretty thoughtful about this stuff without getting too abstract. But when you really think about how people, and when we talk to people about how these investments decisions are made and where they choose to make investments, when you look at the returns that they need, when you look at the cap rates, it really is comprised of in the most simple analysis, a few simple things. It's really, if you look at the nominal interest rate less the inflation, you get to a real interest rate, and on top of that, you just really stack a risk premium. And that's what most people look at. And what we do on the government side, the things that we can control are a couple things. We can really triangulate around that risk premium. One, because affordable housing is risk adjusted, so we can bring that down. We can bring down that required risk premium. And the second thing, and I love to say this in large audiences, and what we've done on the code side, is really communicate and telegraph to the world the true cost of operating housing and affordable housing. And once you get that out into the world, that's really where kind of the train went off the tracks.
How do you get that message out? I mean, because clearly not everybody has been picking up on that message.
Yeah, and I think, and I'll say a little bit more about that too, because I think we lost a little bit of momentum, derailed a little bit by Sandy, because I think we turned some of our preservation, but we'll talk about that on the code side. What you really need to do is communicate to people through our code side what it really costs to operate affordable housing. And those components, right, when you look at the risk adjustment of operating affordable housing relative to market rate, because you don't have to push that market as much, you don't need as high a risk premium to do that. And when you actually get the real information around the cost of operating affordable housing or housing in general out into the world, you can avoid a lot of the froth that we saw. And by the way, which we still worry about now. You start to see a little bit of frothiness coming back into the market. We have worked very closely with HDC, with Rich and the team at HDC, but also with HFA and HPD to create a unified front around how we analyze deals that come to us for some sort of subsidy and tax abatements, particularly on the appraisal side. We've been very clear in communicating again and again that we do not want to be driving acquisition prices, that we want to put our investment into scope and into buying affordability. And our experience has been that between all of those elements, we can actually find overlaps where people are willing to take those terms, and so are we, where we get good affordability and we get good deals and we get good long-term regulatory agreements that actually work. So that might be a confluence of, special events that are in a window. Could be a 2-year window depending on what happens in the world.
Right.
But basically that formula holds over the long term as well. So we're pretty confident that we can get a lot of these done, and it's going to be some meaningful affordability that's added to the stock.